last 2 or 3 weeks I've been travelling around the country speaking to mainly men's groups. Rotary, correct. I've been speaking to Rotary groups. Although increasingly, many of the branches now have ladies in the Rotary branch as well. And I've been amazed at the, and I don't mean this in any derogatory way, I've been amazed at the level of ignorance by people who are well-read, experienced, successful entrepreneurs who've worked hard during their lives and still do. And I've given them a demonstration of why we are where we are, which I'll show you in a moment, why Britain is where it is at the moment. And they've been dumbfounded. I've experienced complete disbelief in some of the places I've been. Whether it's because they don't want to believe, or whether it's because it's too big for them to believe, I don't know. But I'm amazed that these well-informed, intelligent individuals are so ill-informed about this. Margaret stole my line, actually, because when I go and talk to these groups and associations, I make a point of saying, or starting off with, I don't want your vote, I don't want your money, I don't even want you to believe what I say. All I want is just 20 minutes of your time, and then you can check up on what I've said, and you can see whether it's true or not. This is what I tell them. And so it safeguards me in case people think I'm trying to push a particular party line. I am a UKIP MEP. I'm a member of the European Parliament. I'm a member of the UK Independence Party, but that's neither here nor there. The cause that most of us in this room espouse is much too big for that. I mean, because all of us in this room, never mind about party politics, all of us want our country back. All of us want to be able to govern ourselves completely without any interference. All of us want that, I believe anyway. Well, I know that I want it anyway. And we are now approaching a point in the history of the European Union that always had to happen. Never mind about the euro, although the euro is the catalyst, but it's not the euro that has brought us to this point in the development of the EU. It's just the very developmental process. Because you see, the project, the European project, always was meant to arrive at this point. And the point being, now one of two things will happen. As far as the project is concerned, what will happen is that there will be a centralized economic control of the Eurozone. That control, you can guess, will sit with the European Central Bank, but really and truly it'll be the German Bundestag that will run the show, sitting side by side with their French partners. It was interesting to note that there was a summit about 2 weeks ago. It was an emergency summit. But 2 days before that summit took place, the French and German, the German Chancellor and the French Prime Minister, President, met, as they always do. The Germans and the French meet for 2 days before every summit. And then, after they've had their 2-day meeting, the summit itself takes place. But of course, it's during those 2 days that they decide what the result will be. And they decided that this time as well. And they decided, so they said, on some kind of bailout, additional bailout for the Greeks. It's not that. It's not that. But that's one of the things that could happen. During the next 6 weeks to 2 months, you could see a huge power grab by the Franco-German axis, taking, if you like, political control of a number of countries. Greece, Ireland, Portugal, possibly Italy, possibly Spain. The problem we've got in this country is it looks as though our own politicians will tie us in some way into that kind of arrangement. The other scenario, and this is what makes the next couple of months very interesting, the other scenario is this, that the peoples of the Eurozone won't want centralized control. They will resent being governed by the Germans and the French. And they will, like the Greeks, take to the streets and demonstrate their opposition to what is happening. Now, if that happens, and continues to happen, even if it's just in Greece, and I say just in Greece in inverted commas, even if it's just in Greece, that could really trip off the contagion they're worried about. Greece could leave the Eurozone. It's already defaulted on its borrowings, so it's defaulted. It's now not going to repay back what it owes, but they're still keeping the pretense alive that, well, it's all right, Greece is all right. It's not all right. It's busted. So is Ireland. Ireland is completely bust. And if they go along with the policies that have been now imposed upon them, they'll have years of austerity and no growth. And if Greece leaves the Eurozone, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the beginning of the end of the project. Because if Greece leaves, Ireland will leave, and Portugal will leave, and I believe that but hang on, we're still in the project, right? We're still there, and they'll do anything to keep us in there. I'll take questions at the end. So we're still there, but that could mark the beginning of the end, because you see, economic and monetary union is one of the main pillars of this project. You cannot have a single state unless you've got a single currency and a single control. And so now that's what they're trying to do. So it'll go one way where there's a total single control by Germany, or it'll go the other way where the nations of the Eurozone begin to break up. And if it does, then what will happen? Well, I've read two articles yesterday and today. One was in the Daily Mail by a person called Andrew Alexander, who I usually dip into from time to time, saying something very, very interesting. He said, look, all these problems that we've got, all these economic problems that we have in Europe needn't be happening. He said, what would be happening now if Greece had its own currency and it was in dire straits? What would happen is that Greece would revalue or devalue its currency and make itself much more competitive. And we would visit Greece because we would be able to spend quite a lot of money because of the low value of their drachma. And gradually the country, through this kind of process, would grow and would grow out of recession. But that can't happen because Greece is in the Eurozone and it can't devalue. It has to stay where it is and take the punishment. And so I will make a prediction tonight, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope that I don't forestall it. I honestly believe the Greeks cannot stay in the Eurozone. So I believe that they will. God bless them. And I hope they do. I know it's going to be difficult, but the next day after they step out of the Eurozone, the sun will still rise. The world will spin around. It won't be Armageddon. We were told exactly the same thing when we were in the ERM, the exchange rate mechanism. We were told we couldn't leave, and we did, and from then on we prospered. So one of those two things will happen. The other article I read, and I would commend it to you, it's on this little website, which is called The Unit, and you're very welcome to take a card. Because, on the back it's got the domain name and how you can get on this. This is a website that I've introduced myself. It's a non-party political website. It doesn't mention UKIP, it doesn't mention any other party politics, but it does tell you the truth about the European Union. And every day, I've got a girl working over in Brussels who's a researcher. Every day she's sending back to the UK information about the latest pieces of legislation. And of course, every day there are latest pieces of legislation coming our way. And if you read and go onto the website, you will see every day fresh pieces of EU legislation aimed straight at us. A person called Eric Edmonds writes for us. Dr. Eric Edmonds. Eric used to be a political advisor to the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England. Eric was right there at the centre of things. And he writes on all things economic. And I've asked him particularly to write about the problems in the Eurozone. And today, his article deals with that. And he tells a story similar to the one I've just told you about, Argentina. About 12, 14 years ago, Argentina was a basket case. The country was bankrupt. The peso, I believe that's the currency of Argentina, had been tied to the dollar, and they relinquished their own financial control in that country. And as we experienced with the URM, they disimproved to the point of bankruptcy. The country 10 years ago was bankrupt, and nobody cared. The people that had money took their money out, The people that had businesses closed their businesses down, and the place really was bankrupt. People didn't have any jobs, and the country was going from bad to worse. The workers then realised that the only way out of this, and I'm not again talking workers against capitalists, but the working man realised that the only way out of this was for them, the workers, to create their own employment, to create their own industry, to create their own businesses. And they did this. And they could do it quite easily, of course, because most of the businesses were worth nothing. But they could put their backs into it, and they did. And of course, they came away from the dollar, and they said, no, the peso will stand on its own now, we'll devalue and revalue as we see fit. And they did. And now it's a roaring success. Now that just shows you, when people have got the ability to do these things, that it is possible. And the reason we're in the position we're in today, and we're paying for this as well, for all these ruckuses that are going on in the Eurozone, we're paying for it. And the reason that this is happening and continue to happen is simply this: the euro exists. And as long as the euro exists, we will have these problems. Once it begins to break up, you'll see these problems will evaporate just like that. It's not going to be easy, but it's not going to be devastation either. So I'd like to show you the program that I've been showing to these Rotary groups and other disbelievers over the past few weeks. I suspect much of what I'm going to tell you now you will know already. The reason that we're in the position we're in today, and some of us would say it's not a particularly good position, is because of a number of treaties that our politicians have entered into over the years. And with each treaty, our own politicians, without consulting us, and I'll come up to this again later, without consulting us, have handed over chunks of legislation and power and governance away from Westminster to Brussels. The first treaty was the Treaty of Rome. This is the one that actually introduced the concept of the common market. Now, there never was a common market. Even back then, back in 1970, 71, 72, even back then, it wasn't called the common market by the people on the continent. It was called the European Economic Community, the EEC. But it was called the common market in this country because we were told that we were entering into a trading arrangement with mainland Europe, and that this would be good for us. Well, what we weren't told was, when we signed up, that we would be signing up to the Common Agricultural Policy. So from then on, from the 1st of January 1973, Brussels controlled our agriculture and our farming industry. Now, I don't need to ask you, but I am going to ask you, you must decide whether that was a good thing or not for our farming industry.
No.
Well, all I do know is this: I used to live in a place called Tavistock on the edge of Dartmoor, and every Wednesday there was a cattle market there, and every Friday there was a panning market. Well, there's hardly any cattle market there now, and even at Goose Fair, which is the big fair every year, that has dwindled to what it used to be. The old communities and the old way of doing things have gone, and that's the reason why. The other thing that we signed up to and didn't know at the time was the Common Fisheries Policy. And there was no way we could have known about the Common Fisheries Policy because back then it didn't exist. Before we joined the common market, there was no Common Fisheries Policy. But because we had the finest fishing waters in Western Europe, it was decided by the European Union, as we will now call it, it was decided by them that this was a common facility and must be shared out within the common market. And so we began to lose control of our fishing. And even though Ted Heath was told that by signing up to this it would decimate our industry, he carried on with it. And it has. I don't know about the fishing industries around this area, but down in Devon and Cornwall, they're virtually gone. And the communities that were built around them are gone as well. That's because of this treaty, the Treaty of Rome. Huge areas of governance went across. And of course, and this is most important, we lost our sovereignty. Ted Heath told us back then that there would be no loss, and I quote him now, no loss of essential national sovereignty. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a document that was written by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office back in 1971. It's freely available. written in that dreadful typescript that the Home Office and the Foreign Office use. It's a massive document, and it talks about what will happen to this country if we were to join the common market. There are in fact something like 12 to 13 pages, and it covers every aspect of what will happen to us. And bearing in mind that Ted Heath said there would be no loss of sovereignty, can I just read this to you? By the end of the century, it says, and this is a document that was for the government, by the end of the century, with effective defence and political harmonisation, the erosion of the international role of the member states could be almost complete. Now, I've just picked out one example. There are many, many examples, and I would urge you, if you do go on that website I told you about, you can read this document in full, and you will see there that time and time and time again our politicians are told that we would lose control of this country, and that the primacy of the law of the European Union would take primacy over our law. It's there in that document. That document, of course, was suppressed for 30 years. One wonders what else has been suppressed over the years in relation to our joining of the common market. Okay, that's the Treaty of Rome. The next treaty was the Single European Act, signed by Margaret Thatcher back in 1986. I won't go into the fact that she says she was tricked into signing this. I'm sure she wasn't. But nevertheless, she said later in life that she regretted signing it. And I don't know why she didn't say that before, because it was quite obvious in the first paragraph. It actually says, the purpose of this treaty is ever closer union. So we've moved away from just a trading arrangement, and this was ever closer union. In addition to that, EU control began to extend far above and way above trade, just trade. Many areas of our lives now began to be affected by our entry into the common market. But B is QMV, qualified majority voting. We were told when we entered the common market, as they called it back then, that there would be no loss of sovereignty, and in addition to that, we could always say no if there was something that was disadvantageous to Britain. B, we could always play the national veto. Qualified majority voting did away with that. There were only some areas when this was introduced where they allowed qualified majority voting, but I can tell you now that virtually everything is decided by QMV over there in Brussels and Strasbourg. So that even if we don't like it, there's nothing we can do about it, because we'll be outvoted. That's what qualified majority voting means, and that's what loss of sovereignty means. It means someone else can control us and govern us. So that's the Single European Act. The next treaty was a fairly notorious treaty, the Treaty of Maastricht, which John Major pushed through by using the Parliament Act. I think he got it through by about a dozen votes. This was a massive transfer, and although it looks like a lot there's a lot more in the treaty than this. First of all, we all became European citizens. Now, no one told us on that particular day of the glad news, but nevertheless, we became Europeans on that day, and you'll see in a moment when we look at the Lisbon Treaty that it's been reinforced again. We are first and foremost Europeans. We are not Brits or English, or in my case, Cornish. We are Europeans. Somebody said, I don't care about that, but we do care about it, don't we? We do care about these things because they're important to us and they identify us for what we are. But I won't go into that. So we became Europeans on that day. Europe courts and laws and regulations began to take precedence over our courts and our laws. And today we have a Supreme Court. We don't have the High Court and the House of Lords anymore. We have a Supreme Court, and that, of course, is a European construct. Transport systems. Every transport system you can think of, road, rail, air, sea, all came under Brussels. They decided on policies in relation to all those forms of transport. The one that strikes me that we can mention is the railways. We were told by Brussels the best way to run a railway system is to have the track controlled and owned by one privatised company and the rolling stock to be owned and run by a number of other privatised different companies. And that is what has happened. And you can see what the result is.
Catastrophe.
Absolutely. I believe John Major said last year, or 18 months ago anyway, it hadn't worked. Well, he was the one that put it into practice, but it hasn't worked, and they're trying now to remedy this. The Maastricht Treaty introduced the concept of a Euro force, a defence force it was called, but defence force of course is an army, or some form of an army anyway, and we're beginning to see that fledgling army. As we wind down ours, you will find that the Euro army will be bolstered. That's why they're closing down most of the old regiments. Regionalisation I'll mention in a moment, but the biggie, I suppose, and we've just been talking about it, is the single currency. This treaty introduced the euro. It was initially called the ECU, E-C-U, and then it was called the euro. As I said earlier on, this is one of the main principal pillars of the European project. There must be a single currency. You'll see in a moment the Lisbon Treaty reinforces this. There must be a single currency. And I tell you now that they will see countries go to the wall, and they will see countries bankrupt and people starving rather than give up this project. Now that's a fact. And part of the project is the single currency. I did mention earlier on that we were in the ERM, that's the exchange rate mechanism, that we joined during the early 90s. We were in it for 23 months, and during that time we relinquished control, financial control of our country, and we tied our pound sterling to the Deutschmark. During that 23 months, unemployment doubled to 3 million. There were over 100,000 bankruptcies of various businesses and hundreds of thousands of repossessions of houses. And during that time, I believe at one stage the interest rate rocketed up to 15%. At the end of 23 months, we had to leave. There wasn't some kind of considered opinion on this. We were going down the tubes, and we had to leave. The big thing about the ERM, the exchange rate mechanism, was that it was the precursor to the single currency. They were trying it out on us to see if it would work, and it didn't. It didn't work. In the same way that it's not working now. What you're seeing happening now happened to us back in the early 1990s. But we were able to step out of it and take back control of our currency. And we did. And we prospered ever since, whilst others didn't. So, that was the Maastricht Treaty, but these massive areas of control were all handed over to Brussels. The next two treaties were negotiated and signed by Tony Blair. The Consolidated Treaty of Amsterdam. You'll see there local aid. What this meant is that the Brussels hierarchy introduced something called the competition rules. This meant that there had to be a level playing field, they say, so that our own government could not give us any advantage financially or any aid or assistance. So, for example, if there was some area in Great Britain that needed capital, our own government couldn't do that. It had to go to Brussels to see if it was all right. And the same applied to any industry or any firm or business. Our own government couldn't give it aid or assistance without the approval of Brussels. A classic example of that is the post offices. The post office service we had in this country not so long ago was the best in the world. We used to have 2 deliveries every day and 2 pickups every day, I think. And if you posted it today, it was there tomorrow. And wherever you went, in any tiny hamlet or little village, there was always the post office. Not anymore. Not only was it efficient, but it also turned in a profit of about 500 million a year that went into the treasury. But because of the competition rules, the Brussels hierarchy said, no, you must make it available to other post office people. So we have people like the Bundespost, and also there's a fairly big company in Holland, and they were allowed to come and cherry pick some of the best parts of the Royal Mail. And this meant that our own Royal Mail began to lose money. And our own government then, because it had to prop up the Royal Mail, it couldn't allow the Royal Mail to go because that would disclose the fact that they'd been complicit in doing that. Our own government then said, right, we will give subsidies to the Royal Mail to keep it going, to keep those post offices going. And the EU said, no, you won't, because that breaks the competition rules. So there was a lot of discussion. And finally, what was arranged was as follows, that our own government could subsidise the Royal Mail, provided it closed 25,000 post offices. That was the deal. And they did. They closed them. I don't know what it was like up here, but down around South Devon and Cornwall, where I was involved in the various action groups that were put together to keep our post offices in the villages, etc. And the local MPs would come along and the local councillors, and they would say to the people in the villages, march up and down and carry your banners and go there to the county hall and so on and so on and so on. I said, look, it's a waste of time. They're going to close your post office. Now, people don't thank you for telling them that, and they didn't thank me. And the local MPs and the local councillors said, don't, he's just from UKIP, don't worry about it. And I said, never mind where I'm from, you're going to lose your post office. Now, one or two hung on to theirs, but most of them, 99% of them, went. And with them often went the local village shop. And suddenly, again, our communities were closing down again. And that comes from this treaty here. Thank you, Mr. Blair. The Consolidated Treaty also introduced the concept of Europol. Now, I'm about to cast an atmosphere of gloom over this house. Before I became anything to do with this kind of thing, I used to be in the police force. Right? If you want to leave now, you can. I don't mind. But I mention this because of Europol. Before Europol, there was Interpol. Now, I can tell you now, never mind about what you saw on television and the series and such, Interpol never existed. It was just a telephone number that we could ring in this country to contact police forces around the world. So there wasn't any organisational structure, but there was, if you like, a way we could communicate with one another. And that's how it worked, and it worked pretty well. Europol is totally different. It is a federal police force without boundaries. It's, if you like, something like the FBI. And it will be, if you like, another layer of control over our own domestic police. And they become increasingly more and more powerful. You'll see in a moment. Freedom of speech was attacked in this treaty as well, a bit where it was suggested that to criticise the EU and its personalities and such forth would be against the law. Well, they haven't enforced that yet, but it's there. And finally, there was a suggestion that there should be straightforward Euro taxes, so that when you get your restaurant bill, as well as everything else that's added on at the bottom, there would be percentage added on for Euro taxes that would go direct to the EU. Again, we haven't got that quite yet, but hold your breath. The Nice Treaty was signed by Tony Blair as well. This is the one where the Irish were able to vote on this because it was a constitutional effect to them. It was to us as well, but I'll deal with that in a moment. But the Irish were asked to vote on this, they did, and they said, no, we don't want it. And the European Union said, well, you better go back again and try again. And this time, get it right. And they did. Now, I've got a lot of time for the Irish. I think they're a great nation, and it's a lovely country. But I just wish they hadn't done that. And I suspect they wish they hadn't done it now. But that's the Nice Treaty. You'll see by this time, the veto had virtually gone. There are still 3 or 4 areas, select areas where we can play the national veto, but it's virtually gone now. And we are, if you like, one of 27 sitting around the table. We're not even sitting around the table because it's the commissioners that govern us now. Eurojust and corpus juris. Can I just spend a little time on this? This is an important one for us all. Under our present system of criminal justice in this country, there is a system that balances out the imbalance between the single individual and the mighty state. We are entitled to trial by jury in this country. We have a presumption of innocence in this country where it is up to the state to prove that we're guilty, not for us to prove that we're innocent. We have the writ of habeas corpus, which means the police cannot arrest us and lock us away without charge for an indefinite period.
We don't actually have those laws.
Sorry?
It's a presumption we have that law. We don't actually have it.
Which one is that?
Trial by jury.
It's gradually being whittled away.
It's due.
Well, it's gradually being whittled away, but I'll come back to that in a moment with you. But the writ of habeas corpus means that the police can hold us for 96 hours. After that, they must charge us. Not so now under the new system that's gradually being introduced in this country. You're finding that trial by jury is being attacked, and that less numbers of cases now are being taken before a jury. The presumption of innocence will go. On the continent there is a presumption of guilt, and it's up to you to prove your innocence. It's a different set of circumstances. And the writ of habeas corpus does not exist on the continent. You can be arrested and held without charge, in some countries for up to 9 months, without charge. The banning political parties at the next European election, and those of us who are in UKIP will be well aware of this, at the next European election, it is highly probable that there will not be national parties standing for election to the European Parliament. It is more than likely that it will be, or it's intended to be, pan-European parties. In other words, parties that have at least 7 different representatives of 7 different nations in them, and not less than 25 members within that grouping. That would be a pan-European party. So you could have a pan-European party standing, if you like, for election in the southwest, and they needn't, in all honesty, have any Brits within that pan-European party, because there will be no Britain, there will be no Germany, there will be no France. There will just be what they now call the Union. And you can't have the Union, or a federal union, if you've got nation states. So the nation states have got to go. And so political parties, national political parties, must go. In the same way that our criminal justice system must go. Our postal system must go. And so on and so on and so forth. This is part of that process. And again, that was squeezed through with the Nice Treaty. Finally, human rights. I'll discuss that in a moment, because it appears again in the Lisbon Treaty. The last treaty, although it may not be the last treaty, but it probably will be, is the Lisbon Treaty. It exists because the European Union tried to introduce to us what they called their EU Constitution. They said this would wrap everything up and it would make us a state. And so they introduced the EU Constitution, and we were promised a referendum on it. And most of the countries in the EU were promised a referendum. France and Germany had their referendum, and they both voted no. No, thank you very much. We don't want that. And so Jack Straw said to us, well, it's in the long grass now, you can forget about it, it's gone. So there's no need for us to have a referendum. And then, about a couple of years later, the Lisbon Treaty came along. And apart from about 2 paragraphs, it is, and I tell you this honestly, hand on heart, it is virtually word for word the EU Constitution. And apart from Gordon Brown, I'm sorry to mention his name, but apart from Gordon Brown, every other major politician on the continent said it is exactly the same as the Constitution. But Gordon Brown said, no, it's not, and because it's not, and because it doesn't affect us constitutionally, another lie, there's no need for us to have a referendum on it. And so we didn't. And he signed it. But Cameron said, but don't worry about that, when we get in, we'll give you a referendum.
Cast iron.
Excuse me. David Miliband signed that terrible document first.
Well,
everyone keeps forgetting that.
£1 million.
Look, I'm not trying to score political points either way on this, right? But these are politicians, these are national politicians that have done this to us, right? Whether they be Labour or Conservative or Lib Dem, it doesn't matter.
Miliband was only foreign secretary at the time. Brown ducked out for a actual full signing.
He did.
He went along.
He did later on. Yes, he did.
Don't miss out. The point is, it's only Miliband and Brown who signed it, and not
Right.
with our mandate.
Indeed. In fact, I'll deal with that point later on. But they signed it, they signed us up to it, and this is it. And it matters, because there are a number of articles in here, which were in the Constitution, which beef up the power, and that's what this is all about, the power of the Union. First of all, it says, and these are just a few I picked out, I would advise you to read this document. It's quite easy to read, it's very big, but it's quite easy to read. Article 1.5 says that the nation states who have signed up to this must support the task of the Union. So whatever the Union sets its face to, whatever it is, At the end of the day, we must support it. That is part of the deal. It could mean, I suppose, the Union taking us to war. I don't know. Article 1.7 gives the Union a legal personality. So what does that mean? It means that in its own right, the Union ceases to be a collection, a voluntary collection of member states, and becomes, if you like, a state on its own, with all the international privileges and rights that a state has. It will eventually sit in our place at the United Nations, and all those international forums that we now have our own representative, they will naturally go, and we will now then be represented by the Union's representatives, because it is a state in its own right. Article 1.8 says that the currency of the Union shall be the euro. As a matter of fact, I was reading this just before I came away this afternoon. What a sad person I am. But it says that. So what that means, of course, is that as long as we are in the European Union, or the Union as and we have signed up to this, then somewhere down the road, if we're still there, the currency in this country will be the euro. That's going to happen. I did warn you, Article 110 reinforces the fact that we are now European citizens. It says that we can hang on to our dual nationality if we wish, but at the end of the day, we are Europeans. This is the notorious flexibility clause, which was known as the passerelle clause in the European Union Constitution. The passerelle is a bridge, bridging, something that bridges things. But they actually call it in the treaty the flexibility clause. And what it says is this, that if the Union wishes to do something, and it hasn't within the treaties given itself power to do that, this clause gives it that power. Whatever that is, it's a blank check. And as a matter of fact, you could do away with the whole of the rest of the treaty and just have this one article, and that would be it. They can do whatever they like, and this clause, which, as our friend has said, Brown and Miliband signed, gives them that right.
Not the right. It doesn't give them the right. They've done it on your foot.
Oh, I agree. You're way ahead of me. A third, or maybe slightly more than a third of the Lisbon Treaty is occupied by the Charter of Fundamental Rights. This came up about 5 years ago. It surfaced, and Tony Blair told us no need to bother with it. It has no constitutional value at all. That's what he told us. And Keith Vaz, who was at that time the European representative for this country, European minister, has said that this Charter of Fundamental Rights had about as much importance as a copy of the Beano. Well, the Beano was a pretty good comic when I used to read it, but it's certainly better than this. No, I won't go into all the pros and cons of this, but sufficient to say it is another power grab. When you and I, if we're British, are born in this country, we are freeborn. We can do whatever we like unless the law says no. That's what freeborn means to us. In addition to that, I've already explained that we've got safeguards built into our Constitution that protect us and are there for us down through the centuries. This Charter of Fundamental Rights tramples all over that and does away with it. As far as being freeborn is concerned, where, as I say, as soon as we're born we can do anything unless the law says no, under the Charter we can do nothing unless the law says yes. There's the difference. And the other thing about the Charter is the Union has said that if it so requires, it can suspend our human rights. That's a big thing as well. But in addition to that, of course, it does away with the British Constitution and all the things that flow from the British Constitution. And we're gradually seeing pieces of the Constitution being dismantled even today. So those are the 6 treaties that mean Britain has arrived at where it is today, if you like, teetering on the brink of being involved in the Union. I put this up because it applies continually, certainly to us now. Devolution or regionalisation. Those of you who have been on the continent, most of us have, will know that the way they govern the regions in the countries of the continent is by regional government. They don't have things that we have over here, counties, county structures. They have regions in Germany, Spain, Italy, France, and such forth. And so that system works on the continent. They intend that it should work here as well, because the European Union, or the Union, is known as the Union of Cities and Regions. So, our country, Great Britain, has been broken up into 12 regions. Let me point out 4, first of all. Ulster, Northern Ireland, is a region. Wales is a region. London, would you believe, is a region. It is no longer the capital of this country. And finally, Scotland. We've heard so much about Scotland and devolved power and all the rest of it. It's not. It's not a devolved country. It is a region. Each of these regions has been given a classified number, or letters if you like, by the European Union. And I can tell you now that Scotland has already been regionalised, Ulster has, Wales has, and London has. That leaves 8 regions for England, where we are. You and I live in the southwest region. Devon, Cornwall, Somerset, Wiltshire, Gloucester, Dorset, and the cities within the confines of those counties. Our region is called UKK. Scotland is UKM. We'll come back to UKK. That's what our region is known as, UKK. We have representatives who represent us, who go along to the Committee of the Regions in Brussels. We don't vote for them, they are political appointees, but they go across and they discuss what will happen within our region. And then they report back to Brussels that it has been done. Notice that in that relationship, it doesn't in any way figure in with Westminster at all. So what's going to happen, and is increasingly happening, is the control and governance of the regions will be direct from Brussels. And Westminster will gradually cease to be relevant as far as that's concerned. And of course, all these regions will pay no heed to the ancient structures of the counties. I come from the county of Cornwall, if you didn't know, and we had an uprising there recently where it was decided that one of the Westminster constituencies of Plymouth would go across the Tamar, the sacred river, and would take in parts of Cornwall in that one constituency. Can you imagine what the Cornish were like? Completely uncontrollable. But it got them nowhere, because the old county boundaries are going to go. And this was just one such. There were others up around the country where they were doing exactly the same thing. The old structures have got to go, because the nation has got to go. And all those things that go to make up what we consider to be our nation must go. So that's why we are where we are today. There's much, much more we could talk about and much more we could discuss. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is the formation of a federal state of Europe with its own currency, with its own government, and with its own centralized structure. We are at a stage now where it will either go forward and quantum leap, or it will begin to falter. There's just one ray of sunshine I've got for you amongst all this, because you will have gathered the way I've talked about it that I'm not its greatest fan, and I'm not. But the one ray of sunshine is, in the whole history of the world, there have been many, many attempts to bring about a single currency and monetary union, which has involved established and long-established countries and cultures. They've all failed. Everyone has failed. And when the testing time has come, for each one of those attempts, the countries have reverted back to what they always were, their own nationalities. And I honestly believe that sooner or later, and I hope it's sooner, that will happen to this particular set of circumstances. And if it does, and the dam breaks, then I believe very, very quickly it'll begin to unravel. They'll fight and scrap against it. I go over there as an MEP on your behalf, and I meet these people. And don't for 1 minute believe that these are superhuman individuals. They are not. Most of them, and I don't mean this in any derogatory way, most of them are third-raters. You wouldn't have them cleaning the bar up there. And these are people who are telling us how to run our country and live our lives. We can't go on much longer like this. So, that's where I see the situation today. I'm quite prepared to answer any questions. I know there's one or two. If you've got any questions, I'll answer them right away. The guy in the back there, come on.
I just wondered if you heard anything in the rumours that the Irish are printing punts again.
I haven't heard that rumour, but what I have heard is that they're keeping things under wraps over there because the situation really is critical. And the Irish are watching what is happening to the Greeks because they're going to say, can we have some of that, please? Because I've already explained to you, the Greeks have already defaulted on the money that they should be repaying because of the less interest they're now being able to give them. The Irish can ask for the same, so are the Portuguese. And that can't go on. The other thing that I heard the other week, I've got one of my researchers working over there, said to me, they're panicking because of this alleged new bailout, because there is no money. It isn't as if there's a sort of pot of money in that particular room that we can take down to Greece. It doesn't exist. So there's a huge amount of panic taking place.
Also, they're printing English ration books.
Are they? Goodness gracious, as long as I can still get my curry out of mine.
The source for that is Ian R. Craig, which may or may not be a name of people here.
No, I haven't heard that. Yes, sir.
Well, the Americans going through a bit of a plight with their monetary system at the moment.
Yes.
Do you see that this lot will do the same thing? Because the power of business is devouring every asset in its debt, and it keeps on taking chunks and chunks and chunks, and it's just going to the point where they can't keep up with it. So even if they put the patch on it now, in 6 months' time it's going to have another patch. And what will happen to this lot?
Well, it's interesting. Well,
the Chinese are wanting to overpower America now. They're not giving them back they're not giving them anything. They're saying, well, you owe us. We've got all these bonds, so you've got to pay us.
Well, you obviously understand it more than I do, because quite frankly, I don't understand international economics. I don't understand it at all. I don't understand why it is that I've been working since I was 15 years of age. I've always paid my bills. I've always paid my mortgage. I paid out the best part of $45,000 to put 2 sons through university. And I don't owe, for the first time in my life, I've been working since I was 15. For the first time in my life, I don't really owe any money. For the first time in my life. And the government are telling me, but hang on, Trev, there's a deficit, and you've got to square up whatever it is, a couple of thousand a year. Why? What have I done? What have you done? I don't understand this. I do not understand it.
Watch the video of Seaguys. If you watch the video of Seaguys, it will explain it to you.
Okay. Well, I'm prepared. This guy's been
3 hours.
This guy's been waiting. Yes, sir. Go on.
You just say you don't understand it. I'm trying to say it very briefly.
Good man.
You made reference to the ECB, yeah? It's the European Central Bank.
Yeah.
They are the stool pigeons of the federal, the IMF. Okay, you're going on about Europe and they're trying to collapse us into Europe. Yes, and I think a lot more of us here know about the New World Order and the One World Order. Okay? Collapse Europe into one, then collapse America into one. The IMF control and have controlled the ECB. And I go to what Dave said earlier about Greece. The simplest way, and I've never ever heard any, and I'd like to see a European representative like yourself say it. The Greek people, the people, okay, the Irish people, the Spanish people, and the Portuguese people need to turn around to their politicians, instruct them to say, excuse me, Mr. ECB, about that debt, sling your okay.
I agree with you.
End of.
No, I agree with everything you just said. There needs to be a touch of reality in all this, and they're omitting the reality. I mentioned to you earlier on 2 scenarios that if they weren't in the Eurozone, they would be okay, that they could do these things themselves. But the power and the ability to do things for oneself, and that applies to this country, is not there as long as you're in the union. No, thank you very much for sort of reinforcing. One more point.
One more point. You've made several references, and I have taken note about the fisheries and the collapse and Edward Heath. Now, a couple of weeks ago, at another meeting here, I'm not interested in your views about this particular man.
No.
It's what he wrote. Christopher Booker wrote a book in 1986, and I have given out various copies.
Great Deceptions?
No, it's the Castles in the Air.
Oh, yeah.
But the point is, in that book, in 5 pages, he explained it all. Now, I have already given out copies, and I only wish that a lot of people in this room, some people, just they don't read. People don't read and think about what they're reading. These 5 pages that I plucked out of his book actually explain everything. I mean, it's more relevant today than when he originally printed it.
He is very good. There's no doubt about that. Okay, thank you very much. Ruth?
Excuse me, Trevor, can you put me right on this, please? The other day, we were out in the streets collecting signatures for your referendum, your for our referendum, I should say. And I went up to one gentleman, and he said to me, yes, he said, I want to sign that. And he signed it, and he said, I've just been on holiday in Greece, he said, and I went to see a doctor, and the doctor charged me XYZ or whatever it was, and he put the money in his pockets. So I said to him, well, okay, I mean, there could be a million reasons for that, but I said to him, can you tell me if I'm right? Well, as you're as Greece from the European Union, surely you should have had your medical, your treatment free.
Yeah.
And he said, well, that's what I thought, but the doctor said I hadn't got a card. But then I told this story to a few people, and they have said that they have been abroad to European countries, and they have handed doctors their cards with their, their European cards, British cards or whatever they are, and they still have to pay. Is that right?
Well, I can't remark on specific stories. There is a general scheme across the European Union that covers the citizens, some of which in some countries requires you to pay some money, in others it doesn't. So that's the first thing I would say. As far as the Greek situation is concerned, it's generally accepted now that the Greeks, most of them, don't pay any income tax. That it is a fairly, if you like, in our terms, a fairly corrupt society, where corruption is fairly rife and nepotism takes place. And that they've got a fairly laissez-faire attitude to life in general. Now, I say this, that's their business. If that's the way they want to live, right? If that's the way they think it's right to live, it's their country, let them do it. The problem.
They come over here and they have the treatment free.
Well, we could talk all evening what we should and shouldn't do in this country, right? We're in a sad state of affairs. But that's why the Greeks are like that. And I must be frank with you. I think the sooner we get back to our national borders and our national identity, then the sooner things will settle down. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I was born in Derby. My father worked at Rolls-Royce, and my grandfather worked all his life at this place. I think they like to change the name, Bombardier.
Oh yeah, Bombardier.
Yeah, and I find it so sad that this great industry that we lost the contract to the Germans. Can you shed some truth on all the different things that have been said? Why we didn't get the contract, why it went to Siemens?
2 reasons. One is I told you about the competition rules. So it's got to be a level playing field. It isn't, of course. It isn't.
Yeah, will be.
No. But our problem is that is one of the reasons why it went abroad. The other reason is, and you must accept this, is that our own politicians are complicit in the breakup of our nation. It's as simple as that, right? And this is just part of that deal. It's a dreadful state of affairs, and I think there's some kind of action group taking place now, trying to reclaim that business back for Britain. I believe there's something taking place, isn't it?
What about the unions? Where do you think, I mean, surely, my father belonged to the unions, etc. Why then, the unions are there for the workers, why don't they make it such a big thing? This is a great industry, and once it's gone, it's like the fishing or whatever, it's gone. You can't resurrect something.
The reason for the unions is the same as the reasons for the farmers. Those of us who've been in this scrap for a few years will tell you the same stories again and again. To begin with, the unions thought that the European Union was a good thing. It is, if you like, a socialist concept, or it was, but it isn't actually. But it was supposed to be a socialist concept, and so that appealed to the unions. But they've picked them off one at a time. This industry is gone, that industry is gone, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so by the time they've woken up to realise what it really is all about, it's a bit too late.
Is Bob Crow one of them that's now coming over our way? Isn't he the one?
Well,
somebody, one of them is leaning.
It is Bob Crow,
Yeah.
our friend again.
You say about unions, let me explain to you. I mean, some years ago, from my stints, joined a union, it was the AEEU. And when push came to shove, and I needed help against Rupert Murdoch, I knew that they were whose side they were on. And I'll tell you this, every single union in this country, including Unison, okay, they are communist, out and out, communists. They're social, you say social communism, but it's more Zionist-controlled communism than anything else.
Can I?
They've all been bought off.
Can I just mention about our friend has mentioned the one world government and all the rest of it. Now, I'm not poo-pooing any of that. I'm sure that there is some guiding effort, which is secretive, and it needn't be. Just to illustrate that point, when I was in the police service in the early 70s, I was on duty down at Torquay, outside the Imperial Hotel, 5-star hotel, for a whole weekend, down there from Thursday through to the Monday morning, and plainclothes, and we were on what they call the outer perimeter, and so all around the hotel there were ordinary coppers, nothing special, but we were on the outer perimeter, and then as you went deeper into the hotel, you came across armed officers and then security people and so on and so forth. And we never had a briefing as to what we were doing there. No one told us. They just said, you work 12-hour shifts, so that meant 4 hours overtime. And that was that. And halfway through the weekend, police officers being police officers, I had a mate who was inside. So he came out and said, what's going on, Smudge? What's going on here? What's it all about? He said, you're not going to believe it. Now, bear in mind, this was the early 70s. 71, 72, something like that, 73. I said, go on then. He said, they're carving up the world in there. He said, and do you know, he said, they're going to give the motor car industry to Japan. Now, this is in the early 70s when none of us had ever seen a Japanese car. And we all said, give over with it. It happened. That, by the way, was a meeting of the Bilderbergs in Torquay. Now, having said all that, settle down now. Having said all that, you were straining at the leash then. Having said all that, what can we do about it? Nothing. There's nothing you and I can do about that.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, but hang on a second.
Yes, there is.
Hang on a second. But we can do something about our own country.
I'll tell you this.
Here.
The answer to that is coming clearly now in the public domain, is Freemasonry. There are two sections and two factions to Freemasonry. There is Judeo-Christian, okay? They're both criminal, and they have all been duping the people, whilst they proclaim to be for faith, hope and charity. It has been the biggest, most despicable lie amongst people. And unfortunately, Rotary is quite infected with them, as you said. You can give lectures. And you actually said Rotary. And there are some dumb people there, yes. And there are some very, very manipulative people.
Well, one or two sorted me out the other day. But I repeat again, but we can't, what we can do, we must do. But there are some things that, I mean, I'm not going to, I and us in this room, we aren't going to stop some kind of global huge structure, but we can put people into Westminster who will get us out of the European Union. I'm not asking you to vote for me, but all I'm saying is we can get out of the European Union by getting people into Westminster who will get us out of the Union. And once we do that, we'll be in the same position as Norway and Switzerland and all those other countries that aren't in the Union and who govern themselves. We can do that. That's what we can do.